The Galactic Academy of Unified Sciences occupied an orbital station the size of a small moon, orbiting the gentle amber planet of Valeries Prime. Its halls hummed with the quiet industry of 300 students from 47 species, Karathi with their crystalline exoskeletons, Velyanari who breathed methane through gill slits, Drevathi whose 4 arms moved in perpetual, elegant coordination. Every corridor smelled of 17 different atmospheric mixtures pumped through species-specific ventilation grates. And then there was Mara Ellison. She sat in the 3rd row of Xenobiological Threat Assessment 201, a compact human girl with dark circles under her eyes and calluses on every fingertip. Her uniform was regulation issue, like everyone else's. Her notebook was paper, actual dead tree paper, which had caused no small amount of bewilderment among her peers on the first day. Professor Kale Veyron stood at the front of the amphitheater, his cobalt blue Velyanari scales catching the overhead light as he swept his 4-fingered hand across the holographic display. The image rotating before the class was a lush, violent world, a sphere of toxic jungle and crackling electrical storms, rendered in lurid green and orange. Today's subject, he said, in the liquid, harmonized tones of universal standard, is the theoretical construct known as the Deathworld. He let the word hang. Several students leaned forward. This concept, popularized in early interstellar folklore, suggests the existence of planets so hostile to life that no sapient species could plausibly evolve upon them. Planets with gravity multiples exceeding 2 standard units. Atmospheric oxygen concentrations above 18%, dangerously combustible. Microbial ecosystems of near-universal lethality. Predator-to-prey ratios that make sustained ecosystem stability mathematically impossible. He clicked to the next slide. A list of theoretical environmental parameters scrolled past. The academic consensus, Professor Veyron continued, straightening the silver clasp at his collar, is that Deathworlds, as described, cannot exist. Evolution on any world severe enough to warrant the label would not produce sapience, it would produce extinction. The energetic cost of maintaining a sufficiently large, complex nervous system cannot be met in an environment of constant lethal threat. The math simply does not work. He turned to face the class fully. His silver eyes swept across the rows. Does anyone have questions before we proceed to the peer-reviewed literature supporting this conclusion? A hand went up. Not the tentative, multi-jointed flutter of a Karathi. Not the slow, deliberate limb extension of a Drevathi. A single, simple, 5-fingered human hand raised calmly, elbow resting on the desk. Professor Veyron's gaze settled on Mara Ellison. He had noticed her before. She was quiet, attentive, and she asked questions that occasionally made him recalibrate mid-lecture, which he found privately irritating and intellectually stimulating in equal measure. Cadet Ellison, he said. Professor Veyron. Her voice was unhurried. With respect, I grew up on one. The amphitheater went very still. A Karathi in the back row made a soft, involuntary clicking sound with its mandibles. The Velyanari beside Mara shifted its gill slits in what might have been discomfort. Professor Veyron's 4 fingers curled slightly at his side. I beg your pardon, he said. Earth. Mara opened her paper notebook. She did not look at a screen, and uncapped a pen. Atmospheric oxygen, 21%. Surface gravity, 1 standard unit, but with significant regional variation in effective survivable conditions. Average predator density in pre-industrial ecosystems, considerably higher than your slide suggests, is theoretically viable. Microbial lethality index, before we developed antibiotics, she tilted her head, well. We didn't call it an index. We called it history. Professor Veyron opened his mouth. He closed it again. He looked at his holographic display, then back at her. Earth, he said carefully, is classified as a Category 2 moderate environment. High biological diversity, yes, but who classified it? The Galactic Survey Commission. Their initial assessment was conducted before any humans were on the survey team, Mara said. Not aggressively. Just factually, the way you'd note that water was wet. Their team landed near a temperate coastal site in what we call Western Europe. Spent 11 days. Left. She paused. They missed the interior of 3 continents, both polar regions, roughly 80% of the ocean floor, and, no offense to the Commission, every single thing that lives in tropical zones and tries to eat you. Silence. Professor Veyron set down his pointer. This was, she observed, a thing he did when a lecture had moved somewhere he hadn't planned for. Even granting your premise, he said, choosing his words with visible care, the academic argument is not that individual environments cannot be hazardous. It is that a planet-wide sustained threat level of sufficient intensity precludes the development of sapience, Mara said. Yes. I read the Devarketh paper. I read all 3 responses to it, and the counter-response, and the supplemental data released in the 3rd edition. She turned a page in her notebook. Their model assumes that a species developing under persistent lethal pressure will either die out or develop limited cognition optimized purely for threat avoidance. Fight or flight loop. Never breaks out of reactive behavior into abstract reasoning. She looked up. They're not wrong about the model. They're wrong about what happens when you run it long enough. Explain, said Professor Veyron. He had, without quite meaning to, sat down on the edge of his demonstration table. Mara set her pen down. The model predicts a ceiling, she said. High threat equals high reactive cognition equals no surplus energy for abstract thought. But the model doesn't account for social complexity as a pressure multiplier. On Earth, the apex threat to early humans wasn't the predators. It was other humans. She let that settle. You want to build abstract reasoning fast? Put a species in an environment where every individual is simultaneously prey to the environment and potential competition to every other member of its own species. Now the organism doesn't just need to model the lion. It needs to model the lion, the drought, the rival clan 3 valleys over, the alliance that might be made, the lie that might be told, the future that hasn't happened yet. She picked up her pen again. Deathworlds don't fail to produce sapience, she said. They produce it faster. Under higher pressure. In a form that looks a lot less like the graceful long-form reasoning your models predict and a lot more like something that's been sharpened on a whetstone for 200,000 years and doesn't entirely know how to stop. The Karathi in the back row had gone completely still. Even its antennae had stopped moving. Professor Veyron was quiet for a long moment. Outside the great transparisteel viewport behind the display board, Valuri's Prime turned in slow, peaceful amber silence. Cadet Ellison, he said finally, are you suggesting that the academic consensus on Deathworld theory is incorrect? I'm suggesting, Mara said, that it was built without sufficient data. She held up her notebook. I can provide primary sources. Someone laughed, a Drevathi 2 rose back, a low, resonant sound. Not mocking. Surprised. Professor Veyron looked at her for a long moment. In his 63 years of teaching, he had been challenged by students before. He had been corrected occasionally. He had, twice in his career, been genuinely wrong about something foundational and had to rewrite his curriculum. He did not particularly enjoy any of those experiences in the moment. He always appreciated them afterward. After class, he said, I would like to see those sources. Mara nodded and uncapped her pen again. The lecture resumed. Slides advanced. Students took notes. But there was a quality to the room that hadn't been there before, a kind of recalibration happening in 47 species worth of minds, a quiet, collective refiling of assumptions. The human girl in the 3rd row kept writing in her paper notebook, calm and unhurried, like someone who had never particularly needed the universe to confirm what she already knew. After class, while the other students filed out, Professor Veyron stood before his darkened display board and looked at the notes Mara laid on his desk. Handwritten. Dense. Cross-referenced. You're not bothered, he said. By any of it? Mara looked up. By what? He gestured, vaguely, at all of it. The station. The alien faces. The 47 species worth of otherness that had been, in his experience, deeply unsettling to most first-year human cadets. I grew up on Earth, she said simply. She capped her pen and tucked it behind her ear. Professor, with respect, compared to home, this is the safe part. She picked up her bag and walked out. Professor Cale Veyron stood alone in his empty lecture hall for a long moment. Then he looked at his holographic display, at the image of the theoretical Deathworld still rotating softly in the air. He reached out and, for the first time in 12 years of teaching this course, he changed the label. Category, under review. He thought that was probably more honest.